Hey guys, tonight we wander through the fog-draped streets of Victorian England, where the gaslights flicker like sleepy eyelids and the buildings lean in close as if whispering secrets through the haze. You're buttoned up in layers that itch your boots clicking on damp cobblestones? It's late, really late, but sleep just won't come. Somewhere behind lace curtains, a woman sighs for the fourth hour straight, counting the chimes of a distant clock tower instead of sheep. Down the road, a shopkeeper reads by candlelight, more out of habit than interest. And you're right here with them, caught in a restless age where insomnia seems to have been baked into the wallpaper. Victorian England was a place of industrial bustle by day and uneasy stillness by night. You might think people were so tired from smog and soot and the sheer mental arithmetic of surviving the 19th century that sleep would arrive like a carriage at dusk. But no. The paradox of progress, it turns out, was wide-awake minds and tired, overstuffed bodies. You probably won't survive this century's sleep hygiene, let alone theirs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I'd love to know what part of the world you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past shuttered storefronts, each window a faint echo of the day's bustle. A flicker of movement catches your eye, the apothecary's lamp still burns. Through wavy glass, you glimpse a cluttered counter lined with bottles, tinctures, tonics, powders, and delicate tins. This is where tonight's story truly begins. In the heart of Victorian insomnia culture sat a surprisingly common vegetable lettuce. Yes, really. Not opium poppies or exotic herbs from faraway jungles lettuce. Your average salad leaf. It might not look like much now, but in the 1800s, lettuce carried the scent of potential relief, a whisper of peace in a sleepless world. Sleep was a major cultural concern. With electrification still decades off, people spent long, dark nights wrestling their minds. The popular belief was that sleep could only come with a certain balance of body and spirit, and anything could disrupt it. Meals eaten too late, strong emotions, improper bedding, or even what color your bedroom curtains were. And while the wealthy tried everything from hypnotists to Turkish baths, the working class often turned to herbs. Chamomile valerian root and lettuce. Specifically wild lettuce lactica virosa, a bitter cousin to your garden romaine. It wasn't just old wives' tales. Ancient medical texts whispered about lettuce's power to calm. Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder had raved about its ability to cool the blood. The Greek physician Galen swore it promoted drowsiness. So the Victorians, with their fondness for dusty volumes and elaborate remedies, thought why not give it another go. You step inside the shop. The air smells faintly of beeswax and mildew. Behind the counter, a bored apprentice in an oversized apron nods. He points to a modest bottle labeled Lactucarium, the star of our sleepy tale. It's cloudy, amber-colored, and slightly sticky-looking. One dose, the label boasts, is as good as an hour's nap. This lettuce opium was extracted from the milky sap of wild lettuce stems, drained, dried, and sold in bottles or tablets. No, it wasn't actually narcotic, but it had just enough placebo power and bitter taste to make you feel like you were doing something serious about your sleeplessness. A few brave souls claimed it really worked. Victorian housewives stirred it into warm milk. Gentlemen dosed it into their brandy, and children, those poor, over-sugared imps, were occasionally calmed with a spoonful before bed. Still, historians argue whether the compound had any pharmacological merit at all. Some say it likely acted more as a mild sedative, especially when taken in larger than recommended quantities. Others insist the whole lettuce craze was a leafy distraction from larger health issues: poor nutrition, industrial stress, and, well, the general anxiety of being a person with bills and a corset. But in a time when self-experimentation was practically a national pastime, it didn't matter much. People swore by it. Letters to editors claimed miraculous nights of uninterrupted sleep. Recipes for sleep syrup passed from neighbor to neighbor like urban legends, equal parts lettuce sap, vinegar, nutmeg, and hope. You watch as a customer, buttoned up with anxious eyes, quietly slides a few coins across the counter. She clutches her bottle like a secret as she slips back into the shadows. You follow her from a distance through winding alleys and ivy-choked lanes until she vanishes into a doorway. Inside her room is dim and plain. She pours herself a teaspoon of the amber liquid, swirls it into hot water, and waits. The walls creak. The cat watches her from the foot of the bed. She leans back on stiff pillows, hopeful. It's a scene repeated 1,000 times across the city. And now maybe you feel your own eyelids getting heavier? Not from the lettuce, but from the quiet march of history itself. There's something oddly comforting in knowing even the most polished Victorians wrestled with the same thing you do every night: how to shut off a restless mind. You're still in that dim bedroom, the one with the creaky walls and the hopeful woman sipping her strange little brew. The bitter steam rises from her cup as she settles into the stiff embrace of her mattress. And just like that, you begin to see how this whole lettuce sleep saga took root, literally and figuratively. By the mid-1800s, apothecaries and herbalists across Britain were preaching the gospel of lettuce. But not the crispy, refreshing kind you'd pile on a sandwich today. No Victorian sleep seekers were more interested in a darker, wilder cousin Lactica virosa, or wild lettuce. Taller, leafier, and far more bitter than the garden variety this plant was found, growing along roadsides and fields often dismissed as a weed. But in the right hands, it became medicine. It started with home remedies. You'd boil the leaves for an hour or so, strain the swamp-colored liquid through muslin, and sip it slowly while wrapped in a shawl by the fireplace. It was earthy. It was murky. It tasted faintly like drinking the contents of your compost bin. But if you were lucky or suggestible, it just might hush that inner monologue enough to drift off. Eventually, though, these informal cures found more formal packaging. That's when the Victorian middle class got involved, and with them the era's signature flourish branding. You see it as you wander the high street labels in loopy script glass bottles, tinted to block the light corks sealed with red wax. Each promises peace, calm slumber, and dreams as soft as linen. Some names sound clinical: Dr. Hartridge's lettuce sedative, or Bromwell's nocturne elixir. Others go for the poetic, the sleepy leaf Mother Night's relief twilight drops. The names alone feel like lullabies. You can practically hear the jingles even now. And it wasn't just liquid. Pills, powders, and even lettuce lozenges joined the market. Fancy catalogs promised that these remedies could calm not just sleeplessness, but nervous tension, wandering thoughts, and feminine hysterics, a phrase which back then covered everything from mild anxiety to full-blown depression to simply having an opinion in public. One French physician even advertised a lettuce-based eye mask soaked in cold tea, claiming it soothed brain agitation. Historians still argue whether that one was a scam, a sincere if misguided innovation, or just a very well-funded prank. But it wasn't just about products. There were also lettuce rituals. You'd be advised to take your lettuce remedy no fewer than 20 minutes after your evening meal, and no more than 45 minutes before your bedtime prayers. You'd pair it with a dry biscuit ginger was best, and sit quietly refraining from all reading or conversation. One etiquette guide even insisted you should avoid excitement of any kind, including laughing at pets. Yes, your dog's silly face was apparently a threat to your circadian rhythm. The interesting thing: it wasn't all quackery. Lettuce, especially wild varieties, contained small amounts of compounds like lacticin and lactocopacrine chemicals that modern scientists recognize as having mild sedative properties. Very mild, mind you. You'd need a pretty impressive salad bowl to knock yourself out with it today. But still, it wasn't nothing. And so the vegetable earned a second life, no longer just food, but something more. You see, in a world where sleep was a mystery and doctors disagreed constantly on its mechanics, people latched onto anything that offered even a whisper of certainty. A cup of lettuce tea was safe, easy, and best of all soothing in its own right. Whether it worked didn't matter nearly as much as the belief that it could. You follow a mother tucking in her child, dropping a spoonful of lettuce syrup into his bedtime milk. He grimaces, then smacks his lips thoughtfully. "It's like flowers and dirt," he says, which you suppose is accurate. She smooths his hair, snuffs the candle, and slips away, leaving only the slow creak of the wooden floorboards behind. Back on the street, you pass another pharmacy window. this one glowing like a lantern in the fog. Inside, a display mannequin lounges in a nightcap beside a pile of lettuce leaves. An embroidered pillow reads, "A leaf a day keeps restlessness away." It's absurd. It's charming. It's Victorian marketing at its finest. You might scoff now, armed with melatonin gummies and sleep-tracking apps. But back then, in the candle-lit hush of gas-lit drawing rooms, lettuce held its own kind of promise. It was part of the broader cultural story, a quiet rebellion against restlessness. In a time before electric silence, before ASMR, before bedtime YouTube, people turned to nature and to habit. You pause at the edge of a small public garden. There's a weathered bench under a tree, and behind it, an overgrown plot filled with leafy green sprawl. Maybe some distant cousin of Latuca virosa still grows there. You reach down, pluck a leaf, and sniff. It smells like grass history, and maybe if you're generous, a hint of sleep. You're still standing by that garden bench. Fingers faintly tinged green from brushing the lettuce leaf. The air is damp, and a curl of fog drapes over the garden wall like a shawl left behind. You glance toward the far end of the path where a narrow brick building glows dimly, another apothecary, but this one a bit more mysterious. Inside, you're about to meet the real star of Victorian lettuce lore, Lacticarium. Now you already had a quick encounter with it, a murky bottle on a dusty shelf. But what exactly was Lacticarium? The Victorians called it lettuce opium, a nickname that both intrigued and misled the public. It looked the part thick, bitter, and faintly sticky. It was even described in some old guides as a gummy extract, which somehow makes it sound worse. To make Lacticarium, herbalists harvested the white sap that oozed from the stems of wild lettuce when cut. This milky substance would then be dried into a resin and mixed into solutions tinctures or pressed into tiny pills. The process was time-consuming, and if you were lucky, the result might produce mild drowsiness, emphasis on mild. You'd get more potent effects from reading a boring pamphlet by candlelight. Still, the placebo effect was strong. Patients believed in it, especially when the right words were whispered in just the right tone. Nature's Nighttime Nectar, one label read. Another bottle boldly claimed, "As effective as laudanum, but gentler for ladies and scholars." Laudanum, of course, was opium dissolved in alcohol, a Victorian favorite that was both terribly effective and thoroughly addictive. In comparison, lettuce seemed as harmless as a bedtime story. Even doctors, some, not all, jumped aboard the lettuce train. Medical journals of the day printed short blurbs about its potential, citing classical Greek sources and modern experiments conducted on overworked medical students. One poor fellow, it said, took triple the recommended dose and simply fell asleep during a lecture about spleens. Historians still argue whether Lacticarium actually did anything at all. Some pharmacologists claim it might bind weakly to certain brain receptors, nudging the nervous system into something vaguely resembling relaxation. Others believe any effect was psychological, compounded by soft lighting warm drinks, and an intense desire to not lie awake in an era before podcasts. But the Victorians didn't need unanimous peer-reviewed conclusions. They needed hope. And nothing sells hope like a carefully designed bottle and a whisper of ancient wisdom. You trail behind a gentleman now, his long coat swaying as he climbs the narrow stairs of a townhouse turned clinic. Upstairs, he's ushered into a dark paneled room, filled with velvet cushions, a ticking clock, and an enormous book titled Physiological Interpretations of Sleep. A bespectacled physician with a walrus mustache leans over a tray. You'll find this superior to chloral, he says, passing over a small dropper bottle of Lacticarium. The man sniffs it. His nose wrinkles. He drinks it anyway. Chloral, by the way, was another sleep aid of the era, far more potent and far more dangerous. The preference for lettuce sap over chemical sedatives was in a way a moral choice. Nature over chemistry. Garden over lab. Especially in drawing rooms where natural had become synonymous with virtuous. Of course it didn't hurt that Lacticarium had no legal restrictions. You could buy it anywhere, corner shops, grocers, even from a peddler with a handcart full of little brown bottles. Children could fetch it for their parents without raising eyebrows. Teenagers experimented with it not to get high, but simply to sleep through boring family dinners. And this accessibility gave rise to the inevitable fraud. You peek behind a curtain into one such operation, Nothing more than a cramped cellar with jars of questionable fluid, all labeled extra pure lettuce extract. In truth, it's mostly tap water flavored with a hint of vinegar and food coloring. But the profit margins are stellar, and no one ever comes back to complain because no one's entirely sure what success even looks like with a lettuce cure. This era of fake science mingling with real desperation led to a unique kind of folk medicine somewhere between kitchen alchemy and placebo theater. You could spend an evening discussing the merits of various lettuce strains like fine wine. Oh no, Lactuca cereola is far too stimulating, one might say. You want a proper Lactuca canadensis for dreamless rest. And they believed it. Not because it was always true, but because belief itself was a balm. In one quiet neighborhood, a widow offers weekly sleep gatherings. By lamplight, guests sip warm lettuce tea, trade stories of restlessness, and practice breathing exercises while holding cuttings of the plant. It's more group therapy than medicine, but in the heavy silence of a sleepless century that counts for something. You move through her parlor, the walls lined with pressed plants and books about Roman health practices. A small sign reads, "We gather in stillness." And that's the heart of it, really. Lacticarium wasn't just a remedy, it was a symbol of effort, of ritual, of doing something about the quiet ache of not being able to sleep when the world expected you to. As the hour grows late, you imagine the town settling into the same restless pattern. Bottles rattling on nightstands, teacups steaming on side tables, hushed footsteps and second thoughts. And somewhere someone is still wide awake wondering if a vegetable can really hold the answer. You're drifting now deeper into the quiet routines of a city trying to lull itself to sleep, one cup, one bottle, one leaf at a time. Past midnight, the glow of most apothecaries fades, their shutters drawn. But in the kitchens and parlors of London's countless row houses, something else is just beginning to steep tea. Not ordinary black tea, though that has its own rituals. No, this is lettuce tea, slightly bitter, faintly grassy, sometimes tinged with the taste of tin if the kettle's old. You peer into one such home now where a silver teapot hisses gently over the coals and the clock ticks just a hair too loudly. A woman in her dressing gown carefully drops a few wild lettuce leaves into a muslin pouch. She's done this before. Everyone in her book club has. It's the latest trend among respectable ladies who do not believe in drugs but absolutely believe in vegetables. You sit at her table and observe. The tea is brewed slowly, the color deepening like the sky before dawn. She pours it into a delicate porcelain cup, blue roses and gold trim, always the same one. The smell is vaguely earthy like hay left in the sun. She stirs in a splash of lemon and a drop of honey, not for taste, but for ritual. That's the thing about Victorian remedies. They weren't always about chemical reaction. They were about process. Preparing lettuce tea took time. It slowed you down. It gave you something to do with your hands while you tried to forget the weight pressing behind your eyes. And the advice came from everywhere: newspapers, neighbors, popular magazines with names like The Hearth Companion or Good Night's Grace. Recipes varied slightly depending on how bitter you could stand it. Some guides insisted the leaves be fresh and torn by hand. Others recommended wilting them first in a warm oven to unlock their sedative virtue. One article from 1879 suggested whispering calming thoughts to the water as it boiled. Speak not aloud, it warned, lest the molecules be disturbed. Historians still argue whether this was tongue-in-cheek or just deeply committed nonsense. But the tea movement caught on. You find it described in diaries tucked between weather reports and grocery lists. Another sleepless Tuesday, tried lettuce tea again. No dreams, but the warmth was welcome. Mary says it helped her sister's cousin's nerves. Must remember to steep longer. In some circles, people even hosted lettuce teas the way others hosted card nights. Guests would bring their own mixtures, some with peppermint, others with lavender or valerian root. They'd trade blends like Pokemon cards for the insomniac elite. Someone would read poetry. Someone else would nod off in a rocking chair, drooling slightly and regard it as a personal success story. You join one such gathering hidden in the back parlor of a bookseller's home. The curtains are heavy, the lamps low, and everyone speaks in a hush. A gray-haired man recites lines from Tennyson while a woman in mauve knitting gloves sips from a steaming cup labeled Lullaby Blend. It's equal parts lettuce and lavender, with a dash of nutmeg to anchor the soul. The room feels sleepy. Not because of the tea necessarily, but because they believe it will help. And belief, you begin to understand, is its own kind of sedative. That said, not all lettuce brews were created equal. Some were genuinely unpleasant. If the leaves were picked too young, the tea turned sour. Too old, and it tasted like the bottom of a boot. And some overzealous hobbyists would spike the mixture with things like brandy opium or chloral hydrate, which, while undeniably effective, kind of defeated the whole natural remedy vibe. Eventually, companies caught on. You start seeing pre-made tea satchels sold in corner shops. Sleepy Leaf Night Garden Dr. Thistlewick's Somni Infusion. Each box promised something just vague enough to escape medical regulation. Supports restful evenings. Promotes calm tendencies. Encourages sleepful states of mind. You'll notice no one ever promised actual sleep, just the suggestion of it. Even Queen Victoria's household was rumored to stock lettuce tea in the royal kitchens. Whether she ever drank it herself is anyone's guess. Historians can't agree some point to a footman's note about dried salad pouches for the Duchess, while others dismiss it as court gossip, brewed stronger than the tea itself. You trail behind a maid carrying a tray down a long hallway of oil portraits and velvet drapes. On it sits a teapot, 2 cups, and a small linen napkin embroidered with lettuce leaves and green silk. The lady of the house, noble pale, perhaps too tightly corseted, receives it with gratitude. She will sleep, or she will lie very still and pretend. Because that too was a goal. In a society obsessed with appearances, being able to say, "I am trying," mattered. Whether or not you succeeded was secondary. You leave her behind staring into the steam curling from her cup. Outside the street is quiet. Even the cats are curled into silence. And as you wander on, you can't help but wonder how many of these sleepy rituals were less about results and more about reclaiming some control over the night. After all, there's something comforting in the act of doing something. Even if that something is just sipping a bitter tea made from a plant that grows next to ditches. You've wandered deeper into the night now, into the part of town where every other shop is a chemist. And every chemist seems determined to outdo the next in a most peculiar competition. The battle of the lettuce window displays. There's something almost theatrical about it. One shop boasts a lifelike papier-mâché mannequin, asleep in a velvet chair, a teacup balanced delicately on one hand, and a bottle of Dr. Fenwick's lettuce essence resting on the other. The label reads, "Sleep without sin, the natural way." Across the street, a rival display features glowing green vials lit from beneath with cleverly hidden gas lamps. They shimmer like absinthe, though with decidedly less excitement. You pause at a window where an entire miniature bedroom has been constructed. Lace pillows, a nightgown hanging from a bedpost, and on the bedside table a neat stack of lettuce lozenges labeled "For the Restless of Thought and Body." It's all very convincing. Or it would be if the doll lying in the bed didn't look vaguely terrified. This is the Victorian marketing arms race in full swing. Sleep was a booming business, and lettuce, being both mundane and mysterious, was the perfect product. It was humble, familiar, non-threatening. Yet it could be bottled, packaged, perfumed, and most importantly, branded. Inside, one chemist you watch as the shop assistant carefully restocks the shelves. There are lettuce drops in little green-tinted bottles. Lettuce powders advertised as gentle relief for the literary mind. Lettuce poultices. Lettuce liniments. One dubious bottle even claims to be distilled from the dreams of monks and midwives, which raises some questions you decide not to pursue. You notice a pattern: many of these products target a very specific group people who think too much. Not laborers or children or the deeply unwell. No, these are for the anxious intellectual, the housebound poet, the fragile man in a waistcoat, worrying about taxes and metaphysics at 3 a.m. And perhaps that's the key. Victorian insomnia wasn't just a physical problem. It was seen as a condition of the soul. Too many ideas, too many feelings, too many unfinished sonnets. Lettuce was less a cure and more a gesture, an edible lullaby for people too refined to simply pass out like common sailors. One shop you pass offers a sleep tasting menu. Yes, really. Customers can sample various lettuce-based products. Tinctures, tonics, teas paired with tiny biscuits and soft string quartets. It's like a wine tasting only for your nervous system. You take a seat among the clientele-gloved ladies, elderly professors, a man who appears to be napping into a feather boa. A server in lace cuffs offers you a delicate glass with a single lettuce drop swirled into chamomile syrup. You sip. It's slightly bitter, faintly sweet, and mostly symbolic. Of course, not everyone was amused. A prominent satirical magazine, the Victorian Wag, ran an article titled, "The Lettuce Lounge Where Geniuses Go to Doze." It featured illustrations of great thinkers collapsing over lettuce salads, while a smug grocer counted coins in the background. Still, public fascination grew. By the late 1860s, some chemists had begun hiring local artists to paint tiny lettuce-themed artworks for their bottles. One popular series included pastoral scenes of shepherds napping in the sun while sheep tiptoed past. Another featured celestial angels plucking lettuce from stars like sleepy gardeners of the cosmos. It all sounds quaint now, of course. A bit silly even. But to Victorians, it was part of a serious conversation about sleep self-care and social identity. Having a favorite lettuce remedy became something like having a signature cologne. You might say, oh, I only trust Greenwell's number 4. The number 5 has too much mint. It was in its way a quiet kind of status symbol. Even the containers mattered. One bottle you examine is hand-blown glass with a cork dipped in beeswax, a label handwritten in sepia ink and a tiny pressed leaf glued to the side. A miniature work of art for your nightstand. And when it's empty, it joins the others on the shelf, not thrown away, but displayed like trophies of your pursuit for rest. Yet as you study these objects, you can't help but notice something else, a kind of melancholy. Because for all the glittering labels and poetic claims, most of these products were sold to people who still weren't sleeping, who were still pacing the floor, counting cracks in the ceiling, or listening to the slow drip of water from a faulty tap. People who had tried the teas and the tinctures and the lozenges and still found their minds wide awake at impossible hours. And so the marketing escalated. One company printed testimonials from fictional happy customers with names like Miss L of Kent and Sir H of Derbyshire. Another sent samples to literary magazines, hoping a few well-placed nods might boost credibility. Some even partnered with hotels to include lettuce tablets and travel kits, a move that was clever, if not entirely effective. You finish your tea now. Cold. Outside the night stretches on. But even as your feet begin to ache, you find something strangely touching in all this lettuce-fueled theater. It was an entire society trying earnestly, if eccentrically, to outwit their own biology, to tell their brains gently enough now. And if it took a parade of green bottles and bedtime pageantry to make that happen, maybe it wasn't such a silly race after all. You leave the sleepy glow of the chemist windows behind and follow the cobbled lanes into quieter territory rows of brick houses with warm lamps flickering in upstairs windows. In here, behind thick drapes and embroidered samplers, the lettuce craze takes on a new life. Not in the form of bottles or teas, but in the pages of handwritten sleep journals and clipped newspaper testimonials. You're in the drawing room of a modest middle-class home now. A small fire pops in the grate, casting gentle light on a writing desk where someone, Mr. Thaddeus G. Weems, amateur philosopher and professional worrier, is documenting his 8th night on the lettuce treatment. The journal entry reads, "Drank 1 full cup of infused lettuce water at 9:15 p.m. Taste remains disagreeable. Coughed once. Slept for approximately 3 hours. Woke after disturbing dream involving a singing dog. We'll try again tomorrow with increased honey." This kind of journaling was surprisingly common. Victorians loved to document their symptoms with the same care they used to organize their silverware. Entire notebooks were filled with meticulous charts describing the type of lettuce used, the steeping time dosage temperature, and whether or not they had quarreled with their cousin that day. For every entry that ended in triumph, slept like a stone, praised be the leaf, another confessed disappointment. But no one gave up. Lettuce had earned its place in the Victorian imagination, not just for its effects, but for its role as a quiet partner in the nightly battle against sleeplessness. Enter the testimonials. The great chorus of success stories, some more plausible than others. You open a folded broadsheet tucked beneath a cushion and scan an article titled, nature's balm for the modern mind. It contains quotes from satisfied users, many suspiciously generic. After years of torment, I found comfort in lettuce. 3 nights in, I felt a gentle quiet in my bones. My nightmares now feature only polite ghosts. Oddly consistent, aren't they? Some of the more eccentric testimonials get reprinted across newspapers, then collected into booklets sold alongside the remedies themselves. One volume, Voices of the Restful, was advertised as a treasury of calm. Inside, one woman claimed her parrot stopped shouting after she started brewing lettuce near its cage. Another gentleman insisted his sleep improved because the scent reminded him of his mother's garden, not because of any pharmacological reason. It's hard not to raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether these stories were written by satisfied customers, inventive shopkeepers, or enthusiastic lettuce salesmen with a flair for fiction. The writing style is often identical. Even the handwriting in some preserved letters appears suspiciously uniform. But this didn't matter to most readers. In an era where science and storytelling were often served together, people accepted these tales as both advice and entertainment. They wanted to believe. And belief in the right frame of mind has its own sleepy weight. You drift into another home where an elderly woman in a lace cap reads such testimonials aloud to her knitting circle. Each member sips tea as she narrates tales of miraculous rest. They nod solemnly like parishioners listening to a bedtime sermon. Lettuce, one says, may not always work, but it tries, bless it. Of course, not all journals and letters stayed optimistic. In the diary of Miss Eliza Trowbridge, age 32, and perpetually wide-eyed, you find this rather dry passage. Attempted lettuce in both tincture and tea. Dreams more vivid than restful. One involved us being chased by a sentient cabbage. Still cannot determine whether sleep was improved or merely weirder. Some experimented with lettuce in unusual ways, placing fresh leaves beneath pillows, wearing them in sachets around their necks, even boiling them into thick paste for soothing back rubs. You find one account of a woman who claimed to hear the leaves whisper when steeped correctly. It's unclear if she ever slept, but she certainly had the most interesting kitchen in Kensington. This was the heart of Victorian medicine, the blurred line between science and symbolism. Doctors could recommend lettuce extract, but patients filled in the blanks with imagination, superstition, and a touch of performance art. You walk now through a modest public library where one small corner is devoted to folk remedies. There's a display case with dried lettuce leaves pressed between glass alongside newspaper clippings, and a faded recipe card reading, for nervous spells and moon sickness. Boil till forgiving. Someone's handwriting has added, don't forget the honey this time. These sleep journals, testimonials, and clipped letters weren't just data. They were confessions, rituals, comfort paper echoes of lives lived half awake. They let people share their struggle without shame. After all, in a time when public image mattered so much, insomnia was the one affliction everyone could admit to without seeming weak. Because at the end of the day or the long sleepless night, what mattered most wasn't whether lettuce truly cured anything. It was that you'd tried, that you'd boiled the water, read the testimonials, written the results, that you were part of something larger, a whole society gently sedating itself with leafy optimism. And maybe that optimism was the strongest medicine of all. You've leafed through enough journals and sleepy testimonials to feel the pulse of a population still searching for peace in the middle of the night. And now you turn a corner figuratively and literally into the next curious chapter of the lettuce saga, the rise of the lettuce lozenge. Yes, lozenges. Because the Victorians never wants to pass up an opportunity to combine medicine with candy, realized that not everyone had the patience to steep tea or endure the bitter sting of tinctures. So they began compressing their faith in lettuce into neat little sugar-coated discs. You're standing now in a brightly lit sweet shop, though this one stocks more than boiled sweets and barley sugar. Behind the glass counter are rows of tins labeled Lettuce Calmers Nighttime Chews and the irresistibly vague sleep buttons. Each comes in elegant packaging, pale green scrollwork sleepy-eyed cherubs, maybe a sleepy sheep or two thrown in for good measure. A young woman in a bonnet steps up to the counter and requests the mint ones. They don't leave a film. The shopkeeper smiles knowingly as though she's asked for something a little scandalous. He pulls down a polished tin, opens it, and offers her a sample. She lets it dissolve on her tongue with a look of theatrical serenity. This is no mere remedy. This is social currency. Unlike the stronger sedatives of the day, lettuce lozenges were subtle both in effect and in reputation. You could pop one at the opera, at a poetry reading, even during a dull family gathering. It wasn't medicine, not really. It was a suggestion, a hint, a minty whisper that you were someone refined enough to worry about your sleep and charming enough to do so with style. These lozenges quickly became the favorite of the restless elite, especially among young ladies who preferred their treatments. Portable, discreet, and wrapped in foil. They were passed around boarding schools, tucked into reticules, and offered at dinner parties as casually as after-dinner mints. Try one, someone would whisper, they're very restful. You'd be asleep before dessert, or at least look convincingly drowsy. You stroll into a ladies' salon, now all upholstered walls and lavender sachets. A game of whist unfolds beneath a chandelier. One of the guests, her eyes rimmed with dark fatigue, reaches into her handbag and offers the group a tin of lettuce lozenges shaped like tiny pillows. They giggle, take one each, and chew delicately. Are they truly calming, perhaps? Or perhaps it's the camaraderie, the gentle placebo of belonging. The lozenge by design didn't need to work, it only needed to exist. It was part remedy, part ritual, part rebellion against the larger, harsher tonics of the time. No bitter tincture here, no ladleful of chloral, just a tidy little disc of possibility. Of course not everyone bought into the calm. In the darker corners of satire and scandal, lettuce lozenges became the butt of jokes. Cartoons in Punch magazine depicted hysterical aristocrats dozing off mid-conversation, a trail of leafy drool tracing their jabots. One particularly cruel drawing featured a man collapsing into a fountain after mistaking a tin of lettuce drops for peppermints. Still, sales climbed, and not just in England. Parisian pharmacies caught wind and developed their own versions, often with names like Somnette or Laitue du Soir. Across the Atlantic, American firms started marketing lettuce pellets to nervous urbanites in Boston and Philadelphia. One particularly bold New York chemist claimed his recipe was blessed by a sleep-deprived bishop. No one checked. These products were often laced with a touch of peppermint oil or citrus peel, giving them a mild flavor that masked the inherent bitterness of dried lettuce extract. But not all were so cautious. One eccentric recipe included cardamom and powdered oyster shell. The logic unclear, possibly just you pause now inside a modest suburban bedroom where a mother is tucking in her child. From her apron pocket, she removes a lettuce lozenge and hands it over like a treasure. The child accepts it with wide eyes, places it under their tongue, and whispers, "Tell me the story of the sleepy leaf again." And she does. About Roman generals who carried lettuce on long marches. About monks who grew it in stone-walled gardens for nighttime prayers. About a queen no one remembers, which one who dreamt only in green. It's folklore now. Soft and slow, just enough to blur the edges of the day. Historians naturally remain divided. Some claim the entire lozenge craze was a marketing trick with negligible effect. Others suggest the slow dissolve of sugar, the steady ritual, and the subtle psychological association created real change in behavior enough at least to merit study. But no matter how slight the chemical footprint, the cultural one was enormous. Lettuce lozenges became a shorthand for sleep itself. They represented the hope that something so small, so ordinary could carry you gently into the arms of rest. As you step back into the night, you hear a bell above the chemist's door ring softly behind you. The tin in your pocket clicks faintly as you walk. You won't take one. Not yet. But it's nice to know it's there. Because in this world of gaslight and whispered remedies, sometimes the mere presence of a cure, even a sugary one, was all it took to feel just a little more at ease. The streets are quieter now, your footsteps muffled on a thick layer of mist that seems to have settled in for the long haul. You pass shuttered shops and darkened homes where only the faintest glow leaks from behind heavy curtains. A stray cat yawns on a windowsill, uninterested in your company. Somewhere a church bell chimes 2 o'clock. You pause outside a well-appointed townhouse where, inside behind velvet drapes and heavy brass fixtures, a very different conversation is taking place. This is the home of Dr. Alcott Redfern, physician, to the socially anxious and sleeplessly ambitious. And tonight, in his paneled study lit by a single gas lamp, he's having a very stern discussion about lettuce. Too much of it, he says, tapping a finger against his copy of The Lancet, and you'll simply end up bloated, not better. Across from him sits a disheveled poet who's been surviving on boiled lettuce and hope for nearly a month. She looks like someone who once enjoyed parties but now fears chandeliers. But it's natural, she insists. The Romans used it. Dr. Redfern sighs and opens a leather-bound notebook filled with notes on lettuce-related cases. Yes, and the Romans also bathed in fermented fish sauce. I wouldn't recommend that either. By the 1870s, the medical establishment had started pushing back. Not with outright hostility, but with that slow, condescending sigh doctors use when a fad simply refuses to fade. There were letters to journals, advisory pamphlets, and quiet reminders that sleep was complex, not something to be solved with a salad. You drift into the lecture hall of a medical college where a young instructor is explaining the difference between therapeutic herb use and a mass delusion. He draws a crude lettuce on the chalkboard, circles it, and writes, "placebo." A few students chuckle. One yawns loudly, ironically, or maybe not. Historians still argue whether lettuce ever held measurable sedative power. Some studies suggest mild analgesic effects, but nothing strong enough to induce reliable sleep. And yet the volume of anecdotal support couldn't be ignored. It's the sort of contradiction that drives 19th century medicine. 1 foot in science, 1 foot in folklore, both feet in a pair of squeaky leather boots. So the debate intensified. On one side, progressive doctors who favored chemical sedatives, chloral bromides, and other concoctions whose names sound like characters from a particularly grim Dickens novel. On the other, herbalists, naturalists, and concerned mothers who clung to lettuce like it was the last good thing in a world of rapidly spinning gears and soot. Articles appeared with titles like "Lettuce, the Leaf That Lies," and "On the Usefulness of Weeds." In one fiery piece, a well-respected surgeon declared, "If lettuce could cure insomnia, I should sleep best in a salad bar." A rival doctor responded, "Better a leaf than a leech, sir," referencing the still common bloodletting practices of earlier decades. Even Queen Victoria's court physicians seemed divided. One court record suggests she was offered lettuce tea for nighttime unease, though whether she accepted is unknown. Another doctor swore by a wild lettuce liniment for his daughter's sleepwalking until she stepped into the goldfish pond wearing a parasol like a hat. You sit now in a genteel drawing room, listening to a debate between a governess, a schoolmaster, and a visiting aunt from Bath. The aunt insists that eating too much lettuce will cause melancholia. The schoolmaster counters that anything eaten in quantity, be it lettuce or lamb, might do the same. The governess just sighs gently, biting the end of a pencil she's using to write a short story titled "The Lettuce and the Lark." This wasn't just a medical debate, it was moral too. Lettuce, you see, was wholesome, quiet, domestic. It stood in contrast to opiates and liquors and other vices of the restless. To some, it represented virtue. To others, it represented wishful thinking wrapped in botanical garnish. And the tension spilled over into etiquette. A popular guidebook hints for the housebound, lady advised. When offering guests lettuce tea, do not boast of its effects. Should they fall asleep during conversation, offer them a pillow, not a certificate. Still, despite the skepticism, lettuce continued to find its way into households. Not with the urgency of a miracle cure, but with the affection of a familiar bedtime ritual. Its fans adjusted expectations, framing it less as a knockout and more as an invitation. You must think of it like a lullaby one letter to the Herbal Observer read. Not every note will work, but the song is still worth singing. You find that sentiment echoed in a small village just outside Manchester. A woman there tends a garden filled with nothing but lettuces, 12 varieties. Every evening she selects a different one, prepares it in a slightly different way, and documents the results. She has not yet declared a winner, but she has, according to her neighbors, become mellow as milk. Whether from the plants or the routine, no one is quite sure. So, as the medical world grew louder with warnings and the chemists filled their shelves with stronger stuff, the humble lettuce just kept being there. Mild green and unimpressed by controversy. And as you sit back down on that misty bench, you can't help but admire at this ordinary leaf that sparked extraordinary hope. Not because it promised the world, but because it asked nothing more than to be steeped gently and taken seriously. Just long enough to forget you were awake. You're sitting still on that fog-softened bench when a distant sound reaches your ears. Clinking glass, a cheerfully exaggerated cough, the unmistakable fizz of something questionable being poured. You rise drawn toward the source, and soon you find yourself standing in the doorway of a curious establishment. It's 1 part pharmacy, 1 part curiosity cabinet, and about 3 parts performance. Welcome to the world of Victorian patent medicine, where the rules are blurry and the lettuce is well electrified. You step inside and blink at the dazzling array of bottles. Here, lettuce isn't just a sleep aid, it's a miracle. It's been infused, enhanced, distilled, and in one deeply confusing case, magnetized. A sign above the counter reads Dr. Felch's Patent Lettuce Elixir for Sleep Nerves and the Restoration of Moral Fortitude. Moral fortitude, that's a new one. This is the golden age of quackery, and lettuce is right at the center. Not because it was powerful, but precisely because it wasn't. Its harmlessness made it the perfect blank slate onto which you could project all manner of fantastical claims. You move past displays featuring lettuce nerve wine night glow, lettuce elixir with phosphorescent bark, and the particularly dubious galvanic lettuce extract, which advertises itself as having been charged by Tesla himself. A bold claim considering Nikola Tesla had other things to do and was probably not zapping salad. Each bottle glows a different shade of green. Each boasts an impossible promise. Instant rest, vivid dreams, removal of gloomy thoughts, enhanced romantic ambition. That last one raises a few eyebrows. You resist the urge to read the ingredients. You know from experience they'll likely include lettuce in name only, plus a generous helping of sugar, a whiff of alcohol, and whatever else the pharmacist had left over. Still, the customers are devoted. A young man in a felt cap claims Sleepy Spark Lettuce Tonic helped him get through finals at Oxford. A woman in a paisley shawl says she uses Vibrant Leaf Serum before her seances. No one questions the logic. They're too enchanted by the glow. And the marketing. Oh, it's everywhere. Broadsheets carry full-page ads showing weary Londoners drifting off under starlight after just 1 spoonful. One features a rather dramatic illustration of a man falling asleep while fencing the lettuce bottle, still clenched in his non-dominant hand. A competing tonic, Midnight's Friend, claims it works in 7 seconds. Another lettuce of the Nile says its recipe was found etched into a pyramid wall. Even children get their own version, Lettuce Lullaby Drops, with a cartoon lamb on the label and instructions written in rhyming verse. You watch as a shop assistant prepares a sample tray for curious newcomers. He wears a velvet vest and a mustache with the curl of someone who truly believes in his lettuce-based mission. He gestures to each bottle like a sommelier describing wine. This one he purrs is floral with a back note of anise and ancient wisdom. He hands you a cordial glass. You swirl, you sniff, you sip. It tastes like disappointment and cloves. Yet people buy it. Because what they're really buying isn't sleep, it's the idea of sleep. The story. The fantasy that this little bottle will tip the scales, will silence the clock in their head, will give them 1 full night without tossing, turning, or revisiting that thing they said in 1843. And the purveyors of such dreams know it. Some even lean into the absurdity. A well-known cellar in Brighton had a storefront shaped like a giant lettuce head. You'd enter through the stem and emerge into a showroom filled with cucumber couches and celery chandeliers. The staff wore green frock coats and greeted customers with a slow, deliberate blink. It's theater, it's commerce, it's human. And at its core, it reveals something essential about the Victorians. Not just that they were gullible, but that they were tired. Tired in the deepest sense. Tired of progress, of noise, of everything being faster, bigger, louder. Lettuce offered a whisper in a world that shouted, "Of course not." Everyone was amused. The more respectable newspapers eventually called for regulation, noting the rise in lettuce-related disappointment. The Daily Register once published an exposé titled "The Great Leaf Lie," detailing how many tonics contained no actual lettuce whatsoever. The scandal lasted roughly a week before public interest turned to a dog that could allegedly spell its name with biscuits. Still, the backlash did prompt some clever pivoting. One enterprising pharmacist began selling imaginary lettuce in empty vial labeled, "For those who have tried everything else." It sold out in 3 days. And in this strange arms race of fantasy and fatigue, lettuce held its ground. Not because it worked, but because, unlike its stronger, riskier rivals, it never hurt. It didn't leave you addicted, hallucinating, or liver damaged. At worst, you had a cup of oddly flavored tea. At best, you believed in the green. So you leave the shop, one of many who tried the drops. The lozenges, the dreams in a bottle. You didn't fall asleep, but you felt slightly better for trying. And maybe that in the end was all anyone really wanted. You've left behind the neon green tonics and velvet curtain chemists, but the absurdity clings to your coat like fog. Tonight, though, you're headed towards something even more peculiar, a military sleep experiment, involving, of course, lettuce. The year is 1882, and you're standing in the hallway of a chilly stone barracks outside Sheffield. The flickering gas lamp above you hums, faintly illuminating a brass plaque that reads, "Experimental Battalion Sleep Study Number 9. You step into a drafty room lined with neatly made cots, each one occupied by a very skeptical soldier trying not to yawn. At the center of the room, a lieutenant reads aloud from a clipboard tonight's protocol, 1 dose of lettuce pill. Number 9 at precisely 2100 hours. No tobacco, no card games, no prayer circles. A few groans follow. This isn't what they signed up for. Pill number 9 is the military's latest experiment in natural sedation. A tightly compressed pellet of wild lettuce resin, oat flour, and a pinch of nutmeg, all bound together with military-grade vinegar, whatever that means. The idea, born from a series of letters to the gentleman's tactical almanac, is simple: give soldiers a reliable non-narcotic sleep aid that won't slow them down the next morning. And so the Army tries it. Willing volunteers and a few voluntold corporals receive their dose. They are instructed to lie down immediately and embrace rest as one embraces discipline. You, of course, are just observing, which is fortunate because what follows is less science experiment and more comedy routine. 10 minutes and one man claims to feel strangely floaty. Another complains the pill tasted like a book that's been left in the rain. One simply snores so dramatically that someone starts clapping. Historians still argue whether this experiment had any measurable results. The official report states, subjects exhibited marginal reduction in bedtime complaints, increased snoring, and a noticeable rise in nonsensical dreaming, including but not limited to dancing sheep and apologetic horses. The pills were quietly shelved but not forgotten. Years later, a crate of unopened lettuce pill number 9 would be discovered in a military warehouse. Someone would take a few home, and somehow they'd end up at a spa for poets. That's where you find yourself next. The spa, nestled in a misty valley in Devonshire, caters to a very specific clientele: exhausted creatives with chronic ennui. They bathe in lavender wear, monogrammed robes, and discuss metaphors with the intensity of battle plans. They're not just tired, they're aesthetically tired. Word of the mysterious military pills reaches one of the spa's resident poets, who acquires a handful through a friend of a retired colonel's niece. Soon, a lettuce-based dream workshop is underway. Participants gather in a candlelit room filled with tapestries and faint harp music. Each is given one pill and instructed to lie on a chaise longue and surrender to the lettuce. You suppress a smile. One woman asks if she may hold her cat during the process. Permission is granted. The results are variable. One man writes a 6-page epic about a talking fern. Another wakes up convinced he's invented a new color. A third insists he's finally processed his breakup from 1878. The consensus: the pill doesn't put you to sleep so much as it tilts your imagination until it falls into a puddle. Naturally, the workshop is a hit. Soon the spa rebrands the pills as Poet's Paws, packages them in tins with embossed ivy, and charges a fee that could fund a small railway. Some critics scoff, others buy 2 tins. Sleep, it seems, is not just a goal, it's an aesthetic. And lettuce, with its gentle absurdity, fits right in. You walk the misty paths of the spa garden, now past stone benches and wind chimes. A fountain trickles nearby, shaped like a reclining cherub cradling a lettuce leaf. A plaque reads, "To those who dream while half awake and wake while half asleep." And it's not just poets anymore. Artists, musicians, mystics, everyone wants a piece of this leafy lore. Not for reliable sleep, but for the idea of drifting off in the arms of something old, botanical, and beautifully harmless. There's comfort in that. In knowing that even as science marches on as pharmaceuticals grow more precise, there's still room in the collective imagination for a plant that promises nothing and yet offers so much softness. So you sit in the garden a while longer. Somewhere a harp resumes its lazy tune. You think of the soldiers, the poets, the dreamers, and the slightly suspicious horses. And for a moment, lulled by fog and story, you wonder what dreams might come if you gave lettuce pill. Number 9, a try. The mist thickens as you leave the poet's garden behind, slipping back into the main road where gas lamps hiss faintly and chimneys puff like slow, drowsy creatures. But tonight's path doesn't lead to dreamers or doctors. No, now you're heading toward a different realm of sleeplessness, the world of the sleepless suffragettes. Insomnia, you see, wasn't just a medical condition or an inconvenience. In Victorian England, for some women, it became a quiet badge of resistance. As the 19th century waned, a growing number of women began writing about sleeplessness, not in shame or as a complaint, but as evidence of awareness. To lie awake, they claimed, was to think, to observe, to feel the tension between duty and desire. You slip into a cramped drawing room, where 3 women sit in stiff-backed chairs surrounded by stacks of pamphlets and letters. A kettle hisses on the stove. One of the women's sharp-eyed, sleeves rolled, sets down her teacup and declares, "Lettuce is a sedative for those who wish to remain complacent." "We do not." The others nod. There's a shift here, subtle but real. For some women, insomnia was no longer something to fix, it was something to understand, to sit with, to write through. In the journals and letters of suffragette thinkers, you find references to long nights spent pacing, reading, plotting. One wrote, "I find no rest, but I find fire. The darkness does not quiet me, it clarifies." Of course, this wasn't the case for everyone. Many women still longed for rest, turned to lettuce, and wrote gently tragic letters about it. But among a certain intellectual circle, insomnia was romanticized. The lettuce remedies that had once been offered as gentle sedatives were now seen in some corners as suspiciously convenient. "They want us calm," one woman muttered in the margin of a pamphlet. "So we'll stop thinking." You pass through one of their reading rooms now, a cozy wood-walled space where a half-dozen women sit at writing desks. Each is surrounded by candles, papers, and cold cups of untouched lettuce tea. One scribbles furiously in a journal titled "Thoughts Unfit for Daylight." Another reads aloud a passage from Mary Wollstonecraft, her voice steady if a bit hoarse from sleeplessness. And then on the mantel, a tiny bottle of lettuce essence still full. It's become symbolic now. Not something to consume, but something to resist. A relic of the world they're trying to reshape. Historians still argue whether these women truly rejected all remedies or simply preferred their own. Some evidence suggests many of them still drank the tea, but rebranded it as a focus aid. Others infused it with stronger herbs, wormwood, mugwort, passion flower, creating potions. Less about sleep and more about staying alert through the long, quiet hours. You're invited to one of their salons held just before midnight in a candlelit parlor. A woman stands and reads an essay on wakefulness and the rights of women. She argues that the act of lying awake is in itself an act of defiance in a world that demands silence. A woman too alert to rest was once seen as a problem. Now she is a prophet. Afterward, the group shares slices of dense bread figs and, ironically, a round of lettuce lozenges passed with ironic smiles. For tradition, one says, popping one in her mouth, not sedation. There's a quiet revolution here, one built not on riots, but on the soft rebellion of refusing to be lulled. Lettuce, once an ally in the pursuit of rest, has now become a subject of satire, contemplation, and even poetry. A woman named Clara reads a piece aloud titled, "The Salad Sleeps While I Do Not." It includes the line, "Let them steep their leaves in silver pots. I steep my thoughts in fire." And then there are the letter lighters women, who wrote letters long into the night by candlelight, many of which survive today. Some wrote to lovers, some to future voters, some to no one at all. One particularly memorable note reads, "The world insists I be gentle and quiet. The world will not sleep, and neither shall I." Lettuce be damned. Still, not all these women rejected tradition entirely. One suffragette, Annie Mae Elcombe, famously hosted lettuce and liberty gatherings. Part rally, part tea party, where she'd brew a dozen varieties of lettuce tea and serve them with pamphlets. "Let them drink green," she said. "They'll need the strength." You step outside again, leaving the flickering candlelight and the smell of ink behind. The street is still, but you can feel it, that buzzing energy of minds wide awake, unwilling to be dimmed. And somewhere in a window above, a woman still sits at her desk, pen in hand, scribbling something brave and bitter and green. You've walked through salons and sleep clinics, past poets and powdered lozenges, and now your steps echo down a stone corridor that smells faintly of damp laundry and boiled cabbage. You've entered one of the quietest and eeriest corners of the Victorian world, the asylum. The walls here are thick, the ceilings high and slightly stained. The windows are small and set far too high for even the most ambitious patient to reach. But it's quiet. Oh, so quiet. You're in a rest ward where nervous cases are kept under low light and low supervision, with the hope that their minds might simply give up and fall asleep. And here too, lettuce finds a role. The asylum physician, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a tendency to hum tunelessly as he walks, has recently begun trials with a new dietary program. His notes read, "Lettuce administered daily to those presenting symptoms of agitation, sleeplessness, and conversational repetition. Effect unconfirmed, but patients appear marginally less combative when fed lettuce porridge." Lettuce porridge. Yes, that's what it's come to. Boiled, mashed, blended with oats or barley water served lukewarm. It looks as sad as it sounds. You stand beside one long dining table as the porridge is served to half a dozen women with varying degrees of interest. Some poke at it like it might explain itself. Others eat quickly without question. One smears it into a perfect square on her plate and smiles at you like she knows something you don't. This culinary experiment wasn't isolated. In asylums across Britain, especially in the later part of the century, doctors began introducing vegetable diets for the sleepless and restless. Lettuce naturally played the lead, not only as tea and tincture, but as food sometimes served at every meal under the assumption that cooling the body would calm the mind. Historians still argue whether this was based on actual results or simply convenience. After all, lettuce was cheap, plentiful, easy to grow in the asylum gardens. One letter from a facility in Lincolnshire boasts, "This year's lettuce yield has exceeded expectations. May we all sleep better for it." And yet the results were never conclusive. In one patient log, a nurse recorded that Miss R slept 8 hours following lettuce gruel. The next night, the same dish yielded a report of aggressive tap dancing in the corridor. The causation, if any, remains uncertain. In another case, a young man who had refused to speak for 3 years suddenly whispered, "It's just soup," after his 5th bowl of lettuce broth. He was celebrated briefly as a medical marvel before returning to his silence. Still, lettuce found other uses. Some doctors believed that the act of preparation itself, watching the leaves washed, chopped, boiled, offered therapeutic benefits. A few patients were assigned to lettuce duty, harvesting and prepping the leaves in the gardens, handling them gently, treating them like something sacred. And for some, this quiet routine did help. You pass one of these gardens now. Rows of lettuces stretch in tidy lines under the pale dawn light. A patient in a rough wool shawl is kneeling in the soil, humming as she tends the plants. A sign nearby reads, "Quiet cultivation area, do not disturb unless absolutely sleepless." And then inside again you find a room where something stranger is taking place. A nurse with a fondness for embroidery has begun stitching lettuce leaves into pillows. She says it helps her patients feel closer to nature. One patient insists it stops the voices. Another just thinks it smells nice. The pillows are lumpy, a little damp, and deeply weird, but everyone wants one. There's even a patient who has taken to writing lullabies about lettuce. He performs one for you on a broken piano, the keys sticking at random. The lyrics include, "Leafy cradle green and deep, tuck me into silent sleep." If I wake before the bell, I'll blame the soup, I know it well. This strange mix of medicine metaphor and mild hysteria becomes almost poetic in its own right. But not all stories are whimsical. One particularly grim case file describes a woman diagnosed with extreme female wakefulness who was fed only lettuce for 12 days. She lost 5 pounds and began reciting the Book of Ecclesiastes backward. The treatment was declared a failure, though the notes do mention her complexion improved. You exit the ward quietly, the echo of soft footfalls and soft madness lingering behind you. As you walk through the corridor, you pass a nurse reading aloud to a group of patients from a book on herbal remedies. She's on the chapter about lettuce now. Her voice is gentle, her rhythm steady. The patients don't ask questions. Some close their eyes. One mouths along with the words. And for just a moment, you wonder if it was ever really about the sleep. Maybe it was about being cared for, attended to read to gently in the middle of the night, while a bowl of something warm waited on the tray. Maybe the lettuce didn't cure anyone, but it didn't hurt anyone either, and in a place built on sharp edges that made it precious. You step outside into the soft gray light and glance once more at the garden. The lettuces wait heavy with dew, calm, silent, just there, like they always were. The sky is starting to blush a pale blue at the edges, now a soft signal that night is slowly surrendering. But your journey isn't over just yet. There's one more household waiting for you, a quiet residence where lettuce meets linen, and dreams are embroidered, not swallowed. You're about to step into the most delicately choreographed arena of Victorian sleep culture, the bedtime rituals of the elite. This townhouse smells like lavender and polished wood. Upstairs in a bedroom so pristine it practically curtsies when you enter, a maid is preparing the nightly rest routine for Lady Euphemia. And yes, lettuce plays a role. Not in a tincture or a tonic this time, but as part of an entire performance. You watch as the maid unrolls a pale green sachet and tucks it between the layers of lace on the pillow. It's filled with dried wild lettuce leaves, rose petals, and because why not a few shavings of vanilla bean. She refers to it as the sleep envelope, a name that manages to sound both scientific and dainty. Then comes the tray, a delicate teacup of lettuce and valerian brew, a small silver spoon and 2 thin biscuits, 1 oat, 1 almond. Lady Euphemia prefers her lettuce tea barely warm and sweetened with precisely 2 drops of orange blossom honey. This is not a guess. This is recorded in a sleep journal kept by her lady's maid who updates it like a weather log. It's not just tea, it's temperature scent posture. Bedwear is selected with the seriousness of battle armor. Tonight it's a linen nightgown embroidered with ivy paired with wool socks and a silk head wrap. You'd think she was preparing for winter, not a nap. Victorian etiquette books were obsessed with bedtime behaviors. Entire chapters were devoted to comportment in drowsiness. You weren't just expected to sleep, you were expected to do it gracefully. Mouth-closed hands, folded ideally dreaming of church picnics and moral purity. One guide even warned that slovenly sleep postures may invite unsavory spirits. Another insisted that good sleep hygiene began with a teaspoon of lettuce syrup and no gossip after 9 p.m. And what about dreams? They mattered. Victorians recorded them obsessively, especially women of means who were encouraged to interpret their dreams as reflections of their virtue or failings. A dream of falling might suggest moral looseness. A dream of lettuce, possibly purity, possibly indigestion. The debate continues. You explore the rest of the room. Near the bed is a small bookshelf filled with titles like Nocturnes for the Nervous, The Virtues of the Leaf, and A Lady's Guide to Sleep Without Scandal. A diary lies open on the desk. The most recent entry reads, slept 3 hours, dreamt of a green staircase. Took tea at 2, will ask Miss Maud to reduce the lemon balm. Maud, presumably the maid, has also left a note. Tea prepared with half a pinch of regret and a whole pinch of lettuce. It's all so carefully choreographed. Every detail from the temperature of the sheets to the tilt of the pillows curated for optimal rest. And yet, Lady Euphemia still wakes at 3 a.m., staring at the canopy and reciting psalms to keep from thinking about her cousin's recent engagement. It's not about laziness, it's about expectation. Sleep was seen not as a natural act, but as a reflection of character. A restful woman was a moral woman, a sleepless one suspicious. You slip into another bedroom a few streets over. Here, a gentleman of good standing is being attended to by his valet, who, with the solemnity of a priest, measures out precisely 7 drops of lettuce tincture into a brandy glass. The gentleman sips, then positions himself rigidly beneath a wool and satin coverlet. The moment his eyes close, the valet tiptoes out like he's exiting a shrine. Even the servants had instructions. One training manual advised housemaids not to dust before dawn near bedrooms where lettuce-based rest is in process. Another warned that overly enthusiastic fireplace tending could jostle the dream state. It all begins to feel a bit like theater, and perhaps that was the point. In a society obsessed with propriety, the act of sleeping became a role to be performed, and lettuce, ever the obliging prop, provided just enough flavor of science to make it all seem legitimate. There's a certain poetry in it. Even if no one actually slept, at least they had something gentle to blame, and a ritual to return to night after night when the world felt a little too large and the self a little too restless. You move through the dim halls now past guest rooms, nurseries, a music room with a harp covered in a lace shawl. Everything is still. The city outside is beginning to shift milk carts, rolling roosters waking. But in these rooms, dreams cling to the edges like steam on a mirror. A final thought lingers in your mind. Perhaps all this lace, all this lettuce wasn't really about escaping sleep at all. Perhaps it was about reclaiming control over it. Over something ungovernable. To turn sleeplessness into something dainty, dignified, decorated. Because in a world that expected perfection in every waking hour, even rest had to be performed. Beautifully. The air outside is lighter now, more pearl than ink, though the world is still hushed. You follow the curve of the street down toward a quieter row of homes where the scent of chimney smoke mingles with fresh bread and the ghost of dreams not quite finished. And here in a kitchen that still remembers how to be warm even when the fire's out, you find the last holdouts, the few who still cling to lettuce as a genuine cure despite the world moving on. The year's 1897, and while chemists now offer sleek bottles labeled Night Silk and Somno Drops, while doctors whisper brand names like Dorminax and Hypnoria, there remain households that keep a tin of dried lettuce in the pantry, not for nostalgia, but because they still believe. Inside, a woman in her 50s, wrapped in a shawl and smelling faintly of caraway, stirs a pot on the stove. It's not tea this time, it's a kind of thick green soup, the kind meant for rainy nights and restless stomachs. She hums to herself as she works, pausing now and then to taste a just nod. When her daughter enters tired from a long shift as a seamstress, she ladles a bowl for her without a word. The girl doesn't complain. She just sits, blows on the surface, and begins to eat. This is their tradition, their remedy, their gentle defiance of modernity. You sit beside them uninvited but unnoticed. On the wall hangs a small framed leaf pressed between glass wild lettuce collected from a hedgerow years ago. Underneath it, a handwritten note reads, "For when the mind will not hush." Even as pills and powders flood the market, some still turn to the leaf. It's not about results anymore, it's about rhythm, familiarity. Something passed down mother to daughter like a lullaby worn soft with time. Meanwhile, in cities, the lettuce shelf space is shrinking. Pharmacies now stock tinctures with names like Zintroval and Neuroslumber. These new formulations promise science precision graphs. Lettuce, in contrast, promises nothing. It just is. You pass through a more modern chemist now, glass chrome cold light. There's a small dusty box of Dr. Hayward's lettuce drops on a back shelf, half forgotten the label yellowing. It hasn't sold in months. The clerk doesn't even know what it is. Some kind of diet thing, he offers, shrugging. Back in the country, the herbalists hold out longer. A woman named Edith keeps a stall at the Sunday market. She sells jars of dried herbs, chamomile, hawthorn, and yes, lettuce. She offers samples, quotes Galen and Pliny, and calls her teas sleep poems. Few buy, but many pause. Many listen. Because something in her soft-spoken certainty is convincing. You follow one such customer home, a young man who bought a small jar almost as a joke. That night, he boils the water crumbles in the leaf and drinks without hope. The taste is terrible. The silence afterward, less so. He lies in bed, eyes wide, heart slow. Still awake, but not panicked, not angry at the dark. It's a small win, a green whisper, enough. Some loyalists keep lettuce alive in books. In 1901, a pamphlet titled The Last Leaf Remedies for the Sleepless and the Sentimental appears in Edinburgh. It's part herbal guide, part memoir, part defense of all things mild and unprofitable. The author, known only as A.W., writes, "Let the world chase stronger cures. Let it sprint towards sleep as though it is a prize. I will steep my leaves, sit quietly, and arrive there slowly if I must arrive at all." And arrive they sometimes do. The lettuce movement faded and quaint begins to shimmer again in the margins of culture. It becomes part of the old wives' wisdom whispered in nurseries and sewn into sachets tucked into linen drawers. You find one such sachet in a boarding school for girls still in use in 1905. When a pupil cries at night, the matron doesn't offer scolding. She offers a pillow warmed by the fire and laced with lettuce scent. It works, or it doesn't. Either way, the crying stops. Even into the 1910s, a few stubborn publications still include lettuce in their restorative regimens for the nervous. Always near the bottom. Always described with words like gentle, unlikely, or charmingly outdated. But like the leaf itself, the story of lettuce and sleep doesn't spoil. It just wilts quietly into memory. By the 1920s, it's folklore, a curiosity, a footnote, mentioned with amusement or affection by scholars of Victorian oddities. A green little ghost from a time when dreams were stirred by teaspoons. And yet, in a farmhouse on the edge of Somerset, an old woman closes her eyes after sipping a warm mug of lettuce broth. Her granddaughter watches her notebook, open pen hovering. She's writing a story tonight, not about the war or the radio or the machine that just started talking in the parlor, but about the green. About how once long ago lettuce was a lullaby. You return now to where it all began, beneath the gaslight haze of a city that's slowly waking while your tale is winding down. The carriages are starting to roll again. The chimneys are puffing in rhythm. And yet, in quiet pockets of houses behind frost-laced window panes, a few minds are still adrift in their nightly wanderings. This final stretch is slower now. Less about discovery, more about remembering. You find yourself walking through a park just before sunrise, where the grass is still silvered with dew, and the benches are slick with sleep left behind by those who needed rest more than shelter. And as you pass beneath the skeletal trees, something catches your eye, half hidden in a gardener's plot. A small patch of lettuce, curled and humble, still standing proud against the cold. It doesn't shout for attention, it doesn't promise miracles, it just exists. Just like it always has. You begin to realize this wasn't just a history of lettuce, or sleep, or even Victorian eccentricities. This was a story of yearning, of people reaching for comfort, fumbling toward calm. People who lived entire lives beneath ticking clocks and candlelight, asking the same question you ask now. How do I rest? Lettuce was never the answer. Not really. But it was a form of trying, a ritual, a quiet resistance against the chaos of the waking world. There's something deeply beautiful in that. In a society of rising factories, thick with soot and steam, and expectation to stop and steep a leaf was a subversive little act of care. You could call it ineffective, or quaint, or just plain silly. Or you could call it a pause. Even now, as the world continues to spin faster, to glow brighter, to buzz louder, there are still those who pause. Who brew old teas, smooth cotton sheets, spritz lavender on pillows. Maybe even chew a minty lozenge with lettuce extract out of sheer stubbornness. And you're one of them tonight. Whether this journey made you yawn or laugh or simply forget the shape of your thoughts. For a little while, you participated in something very old and very soft. You chose stillness for just a moment. Now imagine this, you're back in that small dark room from hours ago. The fire is a faint red glow. The bed is turned down. The tea warm but not hot. There's a folded handkerchief on the nightstand embroidered with a single leaf. You take a breath. You settle in. You let the story exhale its last words. The lettuce. It doesn't need to work. It only needs to be there. And now here we are. The story has folded itself gently around you like the cool weight of a blanket, just beginning to warm. The city outside the window is starting to stir slowly, quietly, with the reverence of a cathedral, just before morning prayers. But in this moment, none of that concerns you. Your thoughts have softened at the edges. The questions can wait. The decisions, the errands, the unfinished conversations, they've all taken a step back, waiting patiently in the wings while the curtains draw closed on this peculiar leafy tale. Breathe in. Let your shoulders drop just a little more. Let the muscles behind your eyes relax. Let the hush settle in behind your chest and cradle your heartbeat like a gentle hand. Because this isn't about solving sleep. Not really, it never was. It's about allowing yourself to rest, to step out of the noise and into a story that asked nothing of you but your quiet attention. A story that wandered and meandered like a dream you'll half remember come morning. A story soft enough to carry you to the threshold of sleep, even if you don't quite cross it yet. So whether you're floating there now or still curling into the edge of rest, know that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Not finished, not fixed, just still. And maybe, just maybe, with the faintest whisper of green still clinging to your thoughts. Drift off soon, and if you don't, that's okay too. We'll be here again.